me properly!
Sent to fill me out. I think she is. If I'm wrong, an innocent girl will end up on Ryan's bloody trophy wall. If I'm right, well, I'd best be right. The device is almost finished. I can't get soft now, I can't. I tracked the problem that was blocking the tubes here, and you'll never believe where I ended up. The damn farmer's market, clear on the other end of Rapture. I fixed it right up and installed some new gaskets. Oof, what a mess. Anyway, the code is 0512 if you ever need to get back in there to do maintenance.
From the moment you boot up BioShock, you can feel the story grab hold of you. A plane crashes at sea, a mysterious lighthouse, a sprawling city beneath the ocean. Hooking the player from the first touch without overwhelming him with convoluted RPG mechanics was key to the success of the game and the skillful ramping up of BioShock's legendary gameplay. BioShock has an amazing opening sequence that I can't imagine the game without it, with the plane and sort of the crash. But I understand that didn't come online until like the very end of development. Sean, is that true?
We had a couple of really depressing playtests. We had built all these systems. We thought we were doing a good job of like giving basically people a playground to play with and things to do. And when we had a playtest, we didn't realize how bad of a job we were doing in exposing those systems to the player, because we were so in these systems and in our own heads, we had no idea that we just weren't facing them towards the player at all. So after that playtest, we took a long, cold look at what we were doing and realized that we had to introduce we were confident enough in the systems that they were going to be fun and meaningful to the player, but we really had to think about how we were going to introduce these systems to the player, and in such a way that they understand why the systems were there. Like, you can't ship a README file with the game and expect people to read it. Like, it has to be part of the experience. So the challenge is, how do you introduce people to these systems, but do it in such a way that it fits within the narrative? So we had to integrate all of these things into the story cleanly so that the player felt like it was one smooth experience. And I think the Zap 'em and whack-em thing was one of those.
And the 1-2 punch.
Yeah, the 1-2 punch that came out of that.
The plane sequence at the beginning, I heard a story that like a programmer put that together in like a day or two, and it was a very last minute thing, right?
It was, so we had done a focus test, and we had it was one of the most depressing experiences of my life, because we were very close to being finished, and it was basically giving people what essentially became the demo, and people played it, and it was in Boston, and we were sort of behind these glass windows, all these sort of Boston guys are like, this is a wicked piece of shit. You know, they hated it, and they were making fun of it, and they were saying, it's like watching some guys and dolls getting, beating each other up, and it's the stupidest thing they've ever seen. And we thought we were in pretty good shape at that point. And I remember the focus test guy was like sort of like a doctor giving me the bad news. You know, sorry, Ken, you better get your affairs in order. Right. And we all came into work the next day, and we were like, what are we going to do? And we were all pretty depressed. But I think we started talking. And as we talked, we started thinking about, what are they saying to us? What are these people saying to us? We think there's something there. Well, how are they missing it? And we decided that maybe they didn't understand who they were and who their role in the world, as a character, who their role in the world was, because the game at that point started with you in the ocean, floating in the ocean after the plane crash. And
the crash still was in the fiction, it just wouldn't show.
You just didn't see it, so you didn't have the voiceover saying, my parents always said I was going to do great things or whatever that. They didn't show the plane crash. We didn't establish a time period. Yeah. Because the plane is critical to establishing. You're smoking a cigarette. It's very 1960s looking. All that stuff was established. It wasn't established. So we decided we had no time and no money so we sort of came up with a script. I wrote some lines, a line, I think. Nate, one of our artists, recorded the line. Steven and Sean and those guys got to work on building this very simple sequence, which was relatively simple sequence, and then the plane crash actually happens over the BioShock logo we already had, but we wrote a radio play behind that with altitude of the crash, and that I think set the emotional, and the people screaming in terror on the plane crash, that set the emotional tenor much better and explained who the player was, and all of a sudden we released. Then I think the next real encounter we had was people playing the demo, public encounter, and all of a sudden it was a very different experience.
No, I remember even back in the day, I think we did a thing on TV where we kind of talked about it, and it was like that night, and I remember that night, like people on the forums were just like going nuts. And even though the game had a lot of press attention, when people finally got to play it and go through that sequence, I just remember there was this mass sort of excitement around it, and then the game shipped only a few weeks after that, right? Or a month after that?
A week later, or a few days later.
It's amazing, like now, to hear that, like, literally like a month before the game came out, like the plane sequence came online or something. I mean, it was that late. Right?
Well, we still had to go through certification and all that.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's like within.
It wasn't far. It wasn't far. It was really last minute, and it was one of those things where like you really shouldn't be putting in content that late. Yeah. But we felt it. We were so close to having something good that we just rolled the dice on it, and we worked really hard on it. Like we worked really hard. I remember how much time I spent on just that recorded of altitude. I can still hear the different version of that in my head. There's been so much time on that stuff, and these guys were working on getting the animations right and the
scene was shot in engine, but we decided to pre-render it so that we had to do less QA on it.
Right.
It wasn't going to be some like weird streaming error or crash error. Wow. It was just like, we're just going to show the video, yeah.
And it's interesting because once you start in the ocean, we had this experience of testing a lot with the water effects and how beautiful Steven's water effects were. People didn't realize they were out of a cutscene at that point. And so they would just sit there and stare, and then they pick up the controller. And they pick up the controller, and all of a sudden they realize they were controlling things. But that, as Sean said, that part of the plane is not actually interactive. It was done in the engine, but we just filmed it.
Now, as people were playing through the game and you were testing it, I'm sure there was debate about, when would you introduce this plasmid, what would the ramp be? Did that change at all, sort of as you got towards the end of development, about like, we're going to give people the gun at this point, or it's like, we're going to trigger these plasmids at this point? Like, how did that work?
So, like, we moved guns around. Like, for instance, there was a big debate about, originally you found a gun in the lighthouse, a pistol in the lighthouse.
Oh,
in the very
right
beginning.
there, yeah.
And because it's a shooter, right? Like, what the hell? And we had a lot of debates about it, and I feel that it was important that we didn't do that, because the fact that you sort of go through a lot of the experience without having the distraction of a gun is important to getting you immersed in the world. Because when you have all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But you don't have the hammer. So you just sort of had to take in the world and have that feeling of fear. And like I know when you saw that splicer bounding around on the ceiling, that you couldn't do anything about it. And that had even though that's
those are those moments, right? Like I remember when I played Unreal for the first time, where it's like you're trapped and there's a monster and you can't do it, and the lights go out. It's like that's the moment with the splicer where you're like, I want to do something but I can't, and that evokes an emotion.
I remember we kept, moving where the machine gun appeared around and where various plasmids appeared around. It was a real, it's a real fine-tuning process.
Yeah, and it gave us an opportunity, like especially with the shotgun, to really present the weapons, like put some space between them.
It's a moment when you finally.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we get the shotgun Paul sequence.
Paul Hellquist was he put the sequence together for the when you see the shotgun laying in the pool of light. Like every game developer knows what that means. You know the minute you pick that thing up, something's going to happen. But it was still a very effective way, as I'm remembering it, to look, I've been waiting for this thing. I'm going to pick it up, and now you have an immediate opportunity to use it. But at the same time, we're trying to ramp up the tension level by having the splicers kind of on the outside of the light, so you can't really see them, and then coming in one at a time and attacking you.
Yeah. And we had very few tools to really control how those splicers acted. So how they were set up and how the environment was lit was really important.
There's even other things like when you get the TK plasmid. I don't think we had a lot of physical space and opportunity and time to really present that. So we came up with the narrative that it was the doctor's office and he used TK to practice tennis. And we had the turret in there that threw tennis balls at you. So if you wanted to, you could catch the tennis balls and throw them, and you could knock things down. I think it revealed pickups that you could then pull to yourself with TK. But we're always trying to think of like little backstories that we could do. It doesn't have to be as involved as the shotgun ambush. Sometimes it's just, let's take a grenade turret and turn it into a tennis ball turret.
Because we want to, because I remember like the impulse was, I've been to dentist's office, and there's always some like weird aspect of the dentist personality. They always want to get through their office, They just have to have their hobby featured in some way, and so we saw an opportunity there to both feature this, he's a tennis nut, and teach TK at the same time.
And the even miles from the water, still she's everything.
What?
Hey, I'm just only making it. Who said that? Mr. Coswell? Listen to me! I traded you, oh Lord, for mammon. And what did it get? I'm sorry, Father. I'll do what you say. I'll do what you say. Father, why have you forsaken me? miles underwater, he still sees everything. Jesus loves me.
Hold it!
I can't go. Pestilence! Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm sorry, Father. I'll do what you say. I'll do what you say.
Before the final rat has eaten the last gram of you, Rapture will have returned. I will lead a parade. Who was that, they'll say, as they point to the sad shape hanging on my wall. Who was that?
Let me tell you something about keyboards and all them university types. They're so smart, except when they ain't. I put a couple of drinks in him last week, and before I could say boo, he's telling me he's got the code to his office keyed to the date of Australia Day. Now every weeks I slip in real gentle and nick a buck or two from the till. The Aussie never notices, and I ain't about to tell him. Seems like there's all kind of crazy stuff back there. Maybe one day I'll get more ambitious. I didn't recognize the twist that come into the shop today. Stacked like Sally and dressed to the nines. She's played her cards pretty close to the vest, but you ain't gotta be no college job to see that she's into some bad china. She was asking about magnetic locks and some such. I played it coy, but she took wise. After she showed me round her backyard, I gave her directions to Keebor's tool shop. Rapture's gone to hell, but sometimes the great chain still cuts you a break. Take care of this crop himself.
Because Mr. Ryan's got more important things to do than to enforce loyalty in the ranks. Hello, Fontaine, you backstabbing son of a
A man builds a city at the bottom of the sea. That's a marvel. Another man happens to be on a plane that crash lands on the same city in the middle of the ocean. Why, that sounds more like a miracle.
I've begged Mr. Ryan to hand Fontaine's heuristics over to Atlas's boys as a peace offering, but the stupid sod won't listen to reason. Instead, he's just splicing his mob up, giving them more and tougher plasmids. There's an arms race on here in Rapture, but it's not about who can build the best guns and the biggest bombs. It's about who can become less of a man and more of a monster.
We have turned away from your life. I shall lay my vengeance upon you!
To build a city at the bottom of the sea is insanity. But where else could we be free from the clutching hand of the parasites? Where else could we build an economy that they would not try to control, a society that they would not try to destroy? It was not impossible to build Rapture at the bottom of the sea. It was impossible to build it anywhere else.
your first! I'll kill your first!
Heard that.
We have turned away from your light. Down here in the murk. We have turned away from your light.
better. You got to put it on the core, past geothermal control. And we'll see if these needle noses knew what the hell they were talking about.
He died for your sins, for your sins! I traded his whole life for mammon, and what did it get?
Looks like the ocean's got an itch to retake this corner of Rapture. This happened right after the start of the war. Read about it in the papers. Head on in. I'll see what I can dig up to help. I'm no engineer, but if I read these plans right, you can channel that magma flow using the redirect valve. It'll boil off that water right quick, and you'll be able to reach the core. Orion's sure to take notice. Might want to set up a perimeter just to be certain.
Will these creatures kill you? Even I don't know. As you drag me closer to the abyss, you pull yourself right along with me. I offer you quick death, Percy. Will be preferable to us if you win. So far away from your family, from your friends, from everything you ever loved. But for some reason, you like it here. You feel something you can't quite put your finger on. Think about it for a second, and maybe the word will come to you. Nostalgia. What did Atlas offer you? A piece of my plundered city? Mark my words, your only reward will be a knife in the back.
Head over to Irrational Games and throw the circuit breaker. That will let
defeat me. My strength is not in steel and fire, but in my intellect and will. You hear me, Atlas? Andrew Ryan offers you nothing but ashes! Sometimes you find truth. There is indeed a season for all things. And now that I see you flesh to flesh and blood to blood, I know I cannot raise my hand against you. But know this, you are my greatest disappointment. Does your master hear me? Atlas, you can kill me, but you will never have my city. My strength is not in steel and fire. That is what the parasites will never understand. A season for all things. A time to live and a time to die. A time to build and a time to destroy! Come now, my child. There is one final thing to discuss.
What? Ryan set the core to self-destruct. This is different than what you did. He's got a mind to take down the whole damn city. Get in there and whack the chump before the whole joint blows.
Initial deployment, Vita Chamber. Client Ryan Industries, stage 1, age complete. Sinclair and Alexander tried to explain the science to me, but Sujan does not believe them. They keep saying plasmid reconstruction this and quantum entanglement that, and then poof, dead people come back to life. Bullshit! Of course, Ryan will only allow it to be tuned to his genetic frequencies for the testing. Advanced deployment, Lot 111, Dr. Suchong, Client Fontaine Futuristics. Baby is now a year old, weighs 58 pounds, and possesses gross musculature of a fit 19-year-old. The results are disappointing, but within expected tolerances.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys. You think you have memories. A farm. A family, an airplane, a crash, and then this place. Was there really a family? Did that airplane crash, or was it hijacked? Forced down by something less than a man, something bred to sleepwalk through life until they are activated by a simple phrase spoken by their kindly master. Was a man sent to kill, or a slave? A man chooses. A slave obeys. Come in. Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run! Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys. Kill! A man chooses. A slave obeys. Obey!
Hurry now! Grab Ryan's genetic key! Now, would you kindly put it in that goddamn machine?
Rapture is overflowing with memorable locations and set pieces. In developing a world that feels organic, lived in, and functional, Irrational managed to create a space that feels perfectly suited to the story and action that takes place in it, which begs a question: did the plot shape the location, or did the plot fit squarely into a world that was already established? Let's talk about some of the areas in Rapture, because it's an amazing place, but also it feels like there's certain areas that are very well designed, and that they have, you know, a very certain aesthetic, and the characters in there, it all kind of comes together. Ken, do you have a part of Rapture that resonates the most with you still to this day?
I think the opening is always going to be the most important to me because it's we spent a lot of time there, and it was all for me as a challenge as a narrative guy is sort of how do we set up a very complex series of events and a very complex notion and all this, Andrew, with so much to tell, Big Daddies and Little Sisters and Andrew Ryan and the time period and do that all without cutscenes. And especially, I think, the descent to Rapture when you get in the bathysphere, getting that right, getting everything right down to the bathysphere cresting the hill and seeing the city for the first time. Remember how much we worked on the timing of that, just getting that.
And it took us forever to figure out that we should just put the slide projector covering the window. Again, in hindsight, it seems like such an obvious choice, but we were really trying to figure out, how are we going to tell this story of Ryan and then reveal so you can see the city beyond the hill.
And also we didn't have to show the whole transition going down the bottom of the ocean because the whole screen was covered.
Spoiler alert.
I think that's the part that will always be near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I mean, for me it was Kashmir. Yeah. That was one of the first...
The restaurant at the beginning.
Yeah, the restaurant at the beginning, because it was really the first art box that we created that was Rapture. I mean, we created spaces before that weren't really hitting the Art Deco look. Scott Sinclair had just started, and he built that, designed and built that statue of the Atlas with the world on his shoulders that was in the middle of the room. And Mauricio had done some concept art for us of that space. And once we started putting everything together and getting it into Engine and actually walking around it and seeing those giant windows off to the side that just showed the seascape and really drove home the fact that you were underwater. It was the first time really all the elements started to come together.
And we actually we had built a bunch of stuff, and we actually stepped back and said, we have to just get one room right before we go any further, because we weren't getting it right. And so Mauricio did that concept drawing. Yep. We worked really hard on that statue, and that statue, I think, was the first object we really built in the game that was a BioShock. So we just stayed in that room for a month until we got it right.
And I think the original concept actually had a tram running through it. So it was even more complicated, and that was one of those things where we had to keep pulling back to really focus on what the bare essence of that room was.
Were there parts of Rapture that you never were able to realize that you sort of still missed? The zoo. People talked about Fort Frolic, right?
That I was excited about. Not everybody was excited about the zoo, but I don't know why I was excited about the zoo, because it would have been a nightmare. We had another area that was prior to Arcadia that was more of a straight up agriculture, forest type of area.
Before we had the bathyspheres, we had a whole sort of subway transport system in Rapture, which we spent a lot of time thinking about, and then just realized that these little submersibles would be a much more realistic and much better solution.
And you were going to be able to move between locations in that subway system?
Yeah, much like the bathyspheres, but they were much more integrated throughout the space, and we really want to support them. And we just realized it was not really relevant to what we were doing.
Were there certain locations or areas where you knew a certain narrative point, needed to happen? Like you look at, the reveal of sort of Atlas's true motivations. Like, was that we've got to do it this level because it fits the story? Or was it more that you sort of you had the game laid out in a certain order and you just layered the story on top of it?
I think the big one I can think of is that you encounter Ryan in his sort of that he would live in an area of industry.
Okay.
So he lives in this very industrial area because that's where he would feel most comfortable. And that we wanted his office, his lair, to sort of be not in some residential zone, but where he wants to wake up and smell the grease fires and and the machines and the smoke. That's in his lifeblood. Industry is his lifeblood.
But it also had to be very theatrical. If you look at it now, it doesn't look like an office. You kind of know it's an office because the story is telling you that.
Set, yeah.
And we had some old technology that was laying around in the game that would control environment settings. So old system that we had would let you do high pressure, low pressure, medium pressure. And those would affect lighting and other post-process things in the world. And that was a system that was cut, but because the code was in, we were always trying to figure out ways to use it. And one of the ways that we used it was in the Andrew Ryan sequence, because we didn't have a lot of narrative storytelling tools. We were basically switching the atmosphere to get all the lighting changes. So whenever a light changes in that scene, we're telling the game that the atmosphere is changing. So, and then the preset atmospheres come in and shine the spotlights on them or bring up the house lights when we need them to.
It was very, very early on. You could change the pressure in the areas, and that would change how explosions worked and all this stuff like that. And we just couldn't figure out how to make it gettable for the player. We couldn't make it feedback, but we still had all those. That moved a lot of levers in the game, so we still had the system. So we used it for the sort of theatrical cues of the, very theatrical cues of Ryan appearing, the lights going down where you are, and the lights coming up where he is, because the engine didn't have those tools by default.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
And there was a great sense of sort of artistic progression as you went through the game too, and that each level had its own sort of voice. Was that something that a lot of games as they move further in development, it's like, oh, we sort of ran out of time. We can, it's like we're just going to sort of repeat this and change the color palette. It felt like, for the team, it was very defined from early on that you wanted each sort of level, which they were levels back in the day, to feel distinct.
Yeah, we had sort of experimented with that back on System Shock 2, back when every Doom level looked pretty much like every other Doom level, because they were just working on the same set of assets. We decided with our very rudimentary tools in System Shock 2 that we would progress with color, and every deck would feel different from a color standpoint, even though most of that was lighting, or textures, nothing really more. But we had the tools to actually, sort of theme levels. I think a lot of this goes back to, I think my first memory was actually from when I was 1 year old at the Montreal World Expo.
Remember when you were 1?
Well, I remember being at something at this World's Fair, which I didn't realize I think was in 1967 when I was 1 year old, a little over 1 year old. Wow. And I was on a theme park ride they had and I remember being at this thing where a big bat flies out of this sort of thing and comes up. I don't know why I was a 1 year old was on this ride. I'm not sure, sort of a haunted housey kind of ride. And I remember loving it. And I think that stuck with me. So the notion of sort of theme parky themes and settings, and Disney World does a great job with this. You can go to Disney World, they theme areas. So themed areas are something that always resonated with me. And BioShock sort of always has had this notion of feeling of theme in different areas, much more than the real world has. Like you walk from building to building, most of them you can't really tell them apart. You walk from walk from a floor of an office building to another floor. It's not going to look any different, but we always felt that was really important.
And there's also, if you look at SWAT 4, saw some early experiments with this, especially like the serial killer's house level in SWAT 4, which is probably one of the most dense levels that we ship, but you were trying to tell a specific story with that. And going straight into BioShock and using the same exact engine that we're using, and we were very comfortable at that point with how the engine worked and how to art up these rooms, gave us a leg up when we sat down and really thought about what stories are we specifically trying to tell. And one of my favorite anecdotes from this time period is with Sander Cohen. I think it was Nate Wells and Stephen Alexander sat down one night, and they came up with a backstory for every dead body that you find in that space, and then they told that story with the props that they could. Even if it was just like, this guy crawled 3 feet and then shot himself in the head because he was sad about something, they put those marks in, maybe put a picture next to the guy, and then he shot himself. So they really did their homework and tried to add the backstory for everything that you're going to find in that space.
I've got Atlas's goons hitting us non-stop and 2 dead mechanics just this week. We need to control costs. If I wanted to deal with amateurs, I would have stayed on dry land.
Nice work, Bio.
Welcome back, child. Welcome to the city where you were born. You are angry at Fontaine, yes? Now you know the truth. You are his tool, brought back to Rapture to save him. You have saved many of my little ones. I owe you a debt. While you sleep, I undo some of Fontaine's mental conditioning. His control is no longer complete, but he can still pull some very unpleasant strings. We made your mind with many locks and keys. Fontaine has most of those keys, but not all. Suchong designed your mind, taught Fontaine to control you. You might find answers in Suchong's flat in Mercury Suites.